All right, everyone. This is Dr. Lawasala of NYC Emerging Healthcare Technology, and today we are going to discuss something that's very near to my heart. It's entitled, if you've probably seen it already, it's called Web Development in Healthcare. So, yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you for listening, for giving me an opportunity to actually share what I learned from my 3 years of being a web developer. So, just a brief background on myself. So, I am a physician and a web developer at the same time. And before we begin, I would just like you to go to the webpage medtechsolutions.io, where if you don't have an account yet, and this create an account. But for me, since I already have an account, I can just do this and then I will log in. Okay, it takes a while, and then afterwards you go to trainings, and then there's a topic, this topic here, and then you click on web development in healthcare. So very easy. So anyway, our discussion today will be web development in healthcare. And just so you know what my background is, I spent 10 years in family and occupational medicine clinical practice. I had about 2 years as well of medical affairs practice and 3+ years in web development. So just a few quick fire questions before we begin. What does HTTP stand for? I'll give you about a few minutes to think about what it stands for. The first option is Hyperlink Transient Project, and then we also have the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and then the Hyperlink Transient Protocol, or the Hyper Transfer Project. I'll give you about probably a few seconds, if possible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. The correct answer is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And if you don't know it yet, I will have a brief discussion later. So this lecture is actually geared towards physicians and healthcare practitioners who want to learn more about the coding or the programming languages or coding practices. So these are the objectives of this lecture. The first one is to discuss web development fundamentals, to discuss briefly front-end web development and back-end web development, and web development in healthcare, and how slightly different it is when as opposed to having or doing web development in a general sense or in other industries. And then I will also discuss briefly the commonly used computer languages or programming languages. So as an introduction, the World Wide Web is actually a network of online content that is formatted in the HTML and accessed via the HTTP. So interlinked HTML pages are the ones that can be accessed over the internet. It was originally designed in 1991 by Tim Berners-Lee while he was a contractor at CERN. And its basic architecture, its basic orientation is geared towards what we call a client-server format. And in this sense, servers are actually computer programs that store and transmit documents to other computers in the network, while clients are those that are programs that request documents from the server as the user asks for them. So this is what happens when you log in, or when you when you try accessing your internet. It actually has a server side which you normally do not get to see. So what is the client-server architecture? So it is an architecture of a computer network in which many clients or remote processors request and receive service from what we call as a centralized server, or also known as a host computer. Client computers provide an interface to allow a computer user to request services of the server and to display the results wherein the server returns. Servers actually, what they do is that they wait for requests to arrive from the clients, and then afterwards they respond to them. So ideally, A server provides a standardized, transparent interface to clients so that clients need not be aware of the specifics of the system, either whether it's the hardware or the software that is providing the service. So clients are often situated at workstations or on personal computers, whenever you're accessing them, while servers are located elsewhere on the network, usually on more powerful machines. So, what is front-end development? Front-end development can be categorized, especially if you're browser-based, no? Mostly consists of what? Number one, the HTML. Number two, the CSS, and to some extent, JavaScript if you want more functionality in your projects. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which is the backbone of any website development processes, without which a web page cannot exist. So when you say hypertext, it actually means text, which is links, termed hyperlinks. And the second thing that I'm going to discuss on front-end web development is CSS. So CSS actually is the one which gives the presentation aspect. It's the one that wherein you can control the color, you can add layers, you can add your different containers, and this controls the presentation of the aspect of the site and allows your site to have its own unique or special look. It does this by maintaining your style sheets, which sits on top of each other, wherein of other style rules, and are triggered based on the input on different devices. So actually, this is a process where we call bootstrapping. So if you're using, for example, a laptop, it's different from you're using a cell phone or even an iPad or an iPhone or an Android based form, right? Or even when you're watching television, for example, since you can also view your browser with your television, so it will have different shapes or different appearances, different looks or appearances, and part of this is actually controlled by what we call the CSS, or the cascading style sheets. The third one is what we call JavaScript. This is actually the real programming language. So, this is an event-based imperative programming language, as opposed to the HTML, which is more declarative language, which is used to transform your static HTML pages into what we call a dynamic interface. So if you look at this site, you can see that if I move, see, like that, you can create really beautiful pages and interactive pages with your JavaScript. So this one, I actually use JavaScript, program known as Particles. And the next one is your back-end development. Not a lot of people go into back-end development, precisely because it's very technical. There's no artistic aspect of it. If artistic meaning browser-based, what do you call this? Browser-based things or stuff. Backend is mostly deals with database administration, security concerns, and authentication and authorization, and even things like testing frameworks. And some of these languages, these are the real hardcore languages. They say if you are able to finally perfect your backend, then you can finally call yourself a real software engineer or a web developer. The scripting languages actually that are used for backend web development are, you can use Node.js, PHP. I'm proficient with PHP and Python as well. And then some people prefer Ruby or Perl or other complicated languages like C#, Java, or if you wanna go further into blockchain, you can. There's a language we call Go. So web development is both front and back end. There are version tools which you actually can use, like what I'm using now. I'm using GitHub. You can also use SourceForge or Mercurial, and then to transfer those protocols, you can use FTPs. And of course, you cannot do all these things without your web editors. So web pages are actually created and modified using professional HTML editors. You can use Notepad, Sublime Text, and Visual Code. In fact, when I was younger, I used to use Sublime Text a lot, but as I matured, I found out that Visual Studio Code is actually so much better. So, web development in healthcare. What we are going to discuss is the objectives for this final lecture is we are going to create web development projects in healthcare, hopefully. Nuances in tackling healthcare, identify certain laws and regulation that needs to be addressed, and how to navigate those regulations. So the first thing that we have to talk about when we talk about information, basically, medical information specifically, is what we call as the HIPAA. So HIPAA stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996 and the Public Law 104191, which was actually enacted on August 21, 1996 through the HHS. So the privacy rule, as well as it states that the privacy rule, as well as all administrative simplification rules, apply to health plans, health care clearinghouses, and to any healthcare provider who transmits health information in an electronic form. So this usually deals with electronic medical records. So the privacy rule protects all individually identifiable health information held or transmitted by a covered entity or its business associate in any form of media, whether electronic, paper, or oral. So it includes all. And individually identifiable health information is information which includes demographic data that relates to the individual's past, present, or future physical or mental health condition, the provision of healthcare to the individual, or the past, present, or future payment for the provision of healthcare to the individual. So basically, anything that identifies the individual is covered in this act. And these are what we call protective health information. So what are important or pertinent factors in this data? So in this act. So the first one is names. The second one is all geographical subdivision, which is practically this is your street address, your zip code, even currently public available data from the Bureau of Census. Number three is all elements of dates directly related to the individual, such as your birthdays, your admission date, your discharge date, and even the date of your death. Phone numbers, for example, fax numbers, electronic mails, social security, medical record. That's self-explanatory, and also, the health plan beneficiary number. We also have your account numbers or your certificates and license numbers, vehicle identifiers, serial numbers or license plate numbers. We have device identifiers or serial numbers, even such things as web URLs, IP address, biometric identifiers such as fingerprints or voice prints, full face photos, or any other unique identifying numbers, characteristics, or codes. So basically, these are all protective health information. So as if you are for example trying to create a web-based application that deals especially with medical health records, it's important to recognize or to be able to identify this protective health information so that you will not be fouled by regulatory authorities. So before we continue on, I would just like to have a little break. So so I will be having a little break. So after talking about the HIPAA law, the next HIPAA Act, for example, the next topic, that we're going to talk about, especially when it deals with regulatory matters, is what we call the EU, or the European Union GDPR. GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it is an European Union law on data protection and privacy. It was actually enacted on May 25, 2018, so 2 years ago. What GDPR actually makes it clear is that it applies to, or it states, is that it applies to processing of personal data by controllers and processors in the European Union, regardless of whether the processing takes place in the European Union or not. So if there are organizational breach of GDPR, the company can actually be fined with up to 4% of annual gross global turnover, or about 20 million euros, whichever is greater. So what GDPR actually did is it strengthened the conditions of consent, and that companies are no longer able to use long illegible terms and conditions for full of legalese. This is when you look at what's this when you go to the emergency room, for example, and there are cases like you have to sign a lot of papers, or you're doing a clinical trial and you have to sign a lot of papers. What the GDPR actually states is that to make all those papers easily understandable for the common people, or for the patient themselves, so much that they'll be able to understand the reason behind those processing. It just gives everyone right to their privacy, and to their to their health information. And data for the data subject rights. So under GDPR, breach notifications are now mandatory in all member states, and whenever there's a breach of the database, the corporation or the company, it must be reported or done within 72 hours of having become aware of the breach. So part of the expanded rights of data subjects, also outlined by the GDPR, is the right of data subjects to obtain confirmation from the data controller as to whether or not personal data concerning them is being processed, and for whatever purpose are those data being used. So there's also what we call a term, data erasure, which is the right to be forgotten entities, the data subject to have the data controller erase his or her personal data, cease further dissemination of the data, and potentially have third parties halt processing of that data. So if you do not want your data exposed or used, you can also opt that. You also have that option. So what basically GDPR enshrines is a term we call data portability, when the right for a data subject to receive the personal data concerning them, which they have previously provided in a commonly used and machine-readable format, and to have the right to transmit that data to another controller. So you have now the ability to choose whatever you want to use with your data. Privacy by design is a concept that has existed for years, but it is only just becoming part of a legal requirement with the GDPR. At its core, privacy design calls for the inclusion of data protection from the onset of designing systems rather than addition. So another pertinent information that or act that we have to talk about besides HIPAA and GDPR is what we call as the High-Tech Act. So High-Tech stands for Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act. What this basically does is make sure that there's interoperability of the electronic health records. Did you notice that, for example, so when you go to especially in Europe, when you go to a certain hospital, they may use a different EHR system, while if you go and get admitted to another hospital might be using another EHR system. So sometimes they have difficulty talking to each other, And sometimes, you notice that your doctor has to ask you again what your signs and symptoms are. Although sometimes if you're coming from the same healthcare, so it's a lot better if you're coming from the same healthcare system, because then transfer of data would be so much easier, especially if they're using the same EHRs. So the HITECH Act actually set meaningful use of interoperable electronic health records adoption in the healthcare system as a critical national goal and incentivize EHR adoption. So the goal is not just adoption, but meaningful use of EHR that is they're used by providers to achieve significant improvements in care. So the primary purpose really of electronic health records is to achieve improvements in care faster. But there are so many issues that are happening because different system, different providers, for example, may have different they may use different platforms. So that's the issue with AHRs. So now we go to this was actually Stack Overflow 2019 survey, which talks about the first lines of codes that you use. I actually belong to, so when I was younger, around 20 to 24, I actually started coding, but it's mostly rudimentary. Yeah, so I probably belong to the 2%. Yeah, because it was such a fun time because we were playing these online games. That I mean, how you usually get seduced into coding was all these games, and you have to find a way to make your game, automatize or to automate your game so that it could be constantly playing. So yeah. The second one is, what is the most popular language? I think the 2020 hasn't survey for Sakov hasn't come out yet. But what's the most popular language? It's JavaScript. HTML CSS is not actually a language, but I don't know why they place it here. JavaScript is one of the most popular languages. It's one of the reasons why I actually learned JavaScript more than Python and all the others, because the good thing about JavaScript, it's browser based, so you can actually if you learn JavaScript, you can automatically show your projects to anybody. And the next, of course, we want to know this. What's the top paying languages? So even in 2020, most of these are actually just but it's mostly all this four. So it just changes every now and then. But if you really wanna earn more in in web development or in coding, learn Clojure, F Sharp, and I told you before, right? Go is actually we use it now for I mean, if you wanna go delve deeper into the blockchain technology, you can learn Go as well. But of course, JavaScript is good in itself. And Scala, for example. So these are the top paying languages, and even in 2020, most of this is just practically the same. And the last one, yeah. So this is not yet the last one, but in terms of employment status, most of the responders are actually employed full time, and I think, yeah, this is the last one of the last slides. It's years learning to code. So if you can actually see, only a small number, about 0.2%, are actually coding 50 years or more. If you can see, a bulk of the coders actually learn or have coded 5 to 9 years or less than 5 years. What this slide, or what I want to show or to tell you in this slide, is actually that it's never too late to learn how to code or to learn a new skill. And with the pandemic going on, it's very important to update ourselves, with technology, with understanding how technology works, and how to. I mean, if you wanna know how technology works, it's very much important to know how to to learn how to code. So yeah, I guess that ends. And just a few tips. Oh, if you want to become a developer later on in your life, this is just things that I've learned and I wanted to share. So always do constant practice. Always update yourself and have what we call a learning mindset. Learn something new every day. You can start small projects as well, which I've done. And also, when you do your coding, make sure that those codes are commented so that later on, when you review, when you go back, it's easier for you to actually know which part of the code has an error, or what this specific code actually does. And make sure that your code is tidy. Consider also constructive criticism, and more importantly, find a mentor. It's difficult these days because not just because of the pandemic, but because some of your mentors may have learned a different language, a different programming language. I mean, so make sure you find a mentor who knows not just not just the programming language that you want, but also a mentor who can, because there are developers out there who really can code, can identify problems early on